Something was living in my attic. It came a few years ago. I would wake up early in the morning to a scratching noise. It sounded like it was something brushing against the window. At first, I thought it must be the window cleaner, but when it happened again the next day, I opened my curtains to find there was no one there. I decided it must be an overgrown plant that had managed to reach my window on the second floor. I must admit that I am not the best gardener, and with school and work and life always piling up, my garden does get a little out of control sometimes. Any leaves that happen to encroach over the official boundaries, my neighbor jobs back angrily. I get it, it's kind of annoying, but not all of us have a rich husband and can afford to not work, Caroline. I went outside to look and see what needed chopping back. Like I thought, the garden was getting overgrown, but even the tallest branches couldn't reach my window. I was confused, but not concerned. Okay, so I didn't know what was causing the noise, but equally it wasn't really bothering me. It happened a few times a week, and I was usually awake already anyway. Then I began to get woken up in the middle of the night. Somewhere a bird was crying. It wasn't like any other bird that I know of. I don't know how to describe it. It was somewhere between a shriek and a screech, or a shout and a groan, like someone was shouting directly into your ear, so close you couldn't understand the words. It was loud. It pierced through the silent night like a knife through butter. I have an app on my phone for identifying bird calls, but whenever I tried to capture the sound, it fell silent. I went to the window several times expecting to see something in one of the trees that line the street, but there was no sign of an animal or that anyone else had noticed the shrieking. Once the summer ended, the noises stopped. I didn't think any more of it. Until a few months ago when it came back. This time it started scratching in the evening, and if I stood in the corner of my room, furthest from my bed, I could tell it was directly above me. Rats, I assumed. Or maybe birds. Then it began to shriek. The same noise I had heard before, only closer and quieter. As if it knew I could hear it without it having to raise its voice. It came back every night, longer and longer each time, until I could hear it scratching and shrieking randomly from dusk until dawn. I recalled that Darren, a neighbor who lived a few doors down, had a problem with birds last year. They had come in through broken vents and begun to destroy the timber and waterproof flashing. Darren had no idea they were up there until the water leaking through the roof began to grow mold on the ceiling of his daughter's bedroom. I don't do heights, so I asked Darren if he would mind going up there and checking, seeing as he knew what he would be looking for. We don't know each other that well really, but he's a nice guy and was happy to help. Darren said that if there are birds in the attic, you have to wait until they leave and then block up their entrance point, so it's best to do it in the morning when they're likely to be out catching worms, or you'll end up with dead birds. A few weeks ago, he came round, torch in hand, and armed with replacement soffit vents in case mine were broken, and climbed my rickety old stepladder up into the darkness to find out what was going on. He wasn't up there long. There was nothing up there to find. No animals, no nests, no animal poo, not rat or bird or bat. There was no evidence that anything had been living up there. He did say that one of the vents was missing completely, so he replaced it to stop anything from getting in the future. Whatever it wasn't there now, and with the vent replaced there was no way for it to get in. I gave Darren a bottle of whiskey to thank him for his time. He said he didn't really do much, but he took the bottle. That night, I crawled into bed, expecting a silent night's sleep for the first time in months. I was just beginning to slip away into sleep when my mind snapped awake again. The scratching was back. And it was moving. It was no longer by the wall, but directly above my bed. I thought about the poor creature now trapped above me. Darren had blocked up the vent. With no way out, the creature would surely starve to death. I thought about it dying. Its little body decaying above me. The flies. The maggots. The smell. The smell that would permeate the walls and fill my house with rot. In the morning, I called animal control. I'm in the UK and there are different rules for dealing with different animals. For example, gray squirrels are an invasive species and must be killed, whereas bats are protected and cannot be moved or harmed in any way. I wanted to be sure I was doing the right thing. Surprisingly, they had a cancellation and could come up the next day. That was a week ago. When he came, the animal control guy agreed with Darren. There was no evidence of animal activity in my attic. He was an older guy and called me love when he told me I probably just heard birds walking on top of the roof. I resigned myself to a life of being patronized and kept awake by scratching. But that night there was no noise. Nor the next. And the next. Animal control poking about the attic must have frightened it away. Whatever it was gone from the attic. For the past week, it has been dead quiet. No more midnight scratching or 3 a.m. shrieking. Except I'm lying in bed right now. And something is scratching at my bedroom door. The thing outside my door. It was one of my earliest memories. I must have been right around 3 years old. I remember waking up in the middle of the night crying and afraid. I cried and yelled, but my mom wouldn't come, so I hopped out of my bed to wake her. Opening my bedroom door, tears in my eyes, is when I first saw it. I was able to see out the front door from the hallway between our bedrooms. Our front door had 4 long, vertical glass panels, each about 4 inches wide. Stretched across 2 of the panels was an oddly shaped figure peering in. It's hard to say whether my later experiences have colored this early memory of mine, but I can still see this figure in my mind with such startling clarity that I don't think it unreasonable to suggest that the way I describe it to you now is the way it looked on that very night. It was not human, though it seemed to have a head, an oblique, boomerang-shaped head that spanned half the length of the door. Under its head was a body too narrow to hold the weight of its head. A flowing ribbon-like substance was draped around it, carrying an indistinguishable color that contrasted against the dull gray of its body. In hindsight, the strangest part of this exchange was my immediate comfort from the figure. My fear was gone, and I simply and easily went back to bed. My memory is more sporadic after that first night, but over the next 3 years or so I would continue to wake in the night with giddy excitement to peek at the front door for the thing I called Arrowhead. He didn't visit frequently, and sometimes it would feel like forever between sightings, and my developing brain would question whether the previous sighting was indeed just a nightmare, like my mom kept suggesting. I always told her she was wrong. Nightmares were supposed to be scary, but I was never scared when I saw Arrowhead. Things changed when I was 5 years old or so. I decided that the next time I saw Arrowhead, I would let him in the house so that my mom could see that the thing I was seeing at night was, in fact, real. I figured that he was visiting us for a reason, and standing outside the front door was its way of asking to come in. As luck would have it, Arrowhead visited shortly afterward, and I strolled downstairs in a childlike stupor to let him in. When I approached the door, I saw its eyes for the first time. On both sides of the boomerang of its head was a single, golf ball-sized black pupil, hanging abnormally still in the center of a white membrane. The best I can compare it to now is the eye of giant squid. It was the eye of something that would not seem strange if you were told beforehand that it had evolved in the abyss of the ocean, but staring at me through my front door, I remember feeling an intense horror I had never quite felt before. I ran upstairs screaming to wake up my parents, but they just would not budge. I remember shaking them and screaming in their faces until I just couldn't scream anymore. I locked myself in my room and cried until I passed out on the floor from sheer exhaustion. The years after were difficult. I started seeing a child psychotherapist who attributed the experiences to night terrors caused by pediatric sleep apnea. She explained to my parents that I would stop breathing at night when sleeping on my back, causing terrifying and disorienting hallucinations involving the visitor at our door. I maintained that what I was seeing was real, but in any case, she taught me vital coping mechanisms that I still use to this day to navigate what she would call an apneic episode. It's simple, but it goes like this. Whenever I wake up, certain of Arrowhead's presence at my door, I use cues to remind myself that I'm sleeping. It's sort of like lucid dreaming, but as a nightmare therapy. I ask myself what time it is, or try to wake up someone in the dream. If they don't wake up, I know I'm still dreaming. I know not to look for Arrowhead. I'm able to go back to sleep without issue. But I'm never actually sleeping during these episodes. It's hard to explain, but everything I've described above happens to me in a waking state. I'm convinced that these aren't actual nightmares, at least not the ones most people experience. In high school and college, sharing these stories actually won me a few friends, though none were ever convinced that I was anything other than an imaginative storyteller. More years went by. I married a woman I adore. I got my first job, and then I got a better job. I lost my dad a few years back. We were close, but we never really talked about my episodes. The whole thing made him very uncomfortable, and we never really lingered on the subject. I'm in my late 20s now and life is good. I'm married, and my wife and I are expecting our first child, a boy. We live in a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a walk-up in Brooklyn, and like many before us, we're eager for more space and an elevator. The only problem is that I don't really want to move. Our apartment has a unique feature that I haven't seen in any other NYC apartment, a 6 by 5 foot mudroom between the front door of our apartment and the front door to our living space. My wife says that once we move, she'll miss having a dedicated space to leave our boots during winter snow. I'm going to miss having another door between me and Arrowhead. I wouldn't be writing this post if everything were normal. I know Arrowhead still visits me at night, but like I said, it's not really an issue if I don't go looking for him. The problem started shortly after my wife became pregnant. I started waking up more frequently than usual from Arrowhead's presence at the front door. Being used to the routine, I was more concerned by my lack of sleep than by any malevolence on the behalf of my visitor. Until last night. I woke up to all the familiar sensations. I was in our bedroom, but something about the room was slightly off. I could recognize the furniture and dimensions of the room, but couldn't really focus on anything in particular, as if everything in the room was in my peripheral vision. I asked myself to check the time, but I couldn't convince my body to follow through with the idea. I caught a glimpse at my wife sleeping and wondered whether she'd wake up if I screamed in her face. That's when I heard a knock. My heart sank. It was a fucking knock, and I'm certain of it. That's never happened before. The same horror I felt as a 5-year-old rushed through my chest, and I felt like balling up on the floor and crying myself to sleep again. But reason quickly overwhelmed me and inspired a more primal terror when I realized the knock I heard was too quiet to have come from the front door. It had to have come from inside the mudroom. I don't know what came over me, but I just acted without thinking. I ignored all my cues. I ran to the door of the mudroom and ripped it open to greet my old friend, but nothing was there. Nothing except the front door of the apartment standing tightly shut across 6 feet of darkness. Fluorescent light from the communal hallway of the building outlined the front door, but no light flowed through the peephole. I knew he was looking through it from the outside. I took a step forward to meet his eye through it, to invite him in and feel the warmth of our first encounter. But then I remembered those dead eyes of his. I closed the door and cued myself back to sleep. I've calmed down a bit and wanted to share my story here. I don't really have many other outlets, and I fear my closest relationships would suffer from the revelation that I am still visited at night, so I mostly keep my episodes to myself these days. I wanted to share that I have a plan for when he visits next. I've spent too long hiding behind the security and comfort of my door. With a little one along the way, I can no longer just ball up on the floor and cry. I need to discover what he wants from me and stop pretending that he's not there. I need him to move on from me and my family. Next time, I'm going to open the door, but it won't be to let him in. Next time, I will step outside with him. I don't know what to do. This is going to sound completely batshit insane. But I have to tell someone. About a week ago, I saw a jogger on my way home from work. We live in a small town with a lot of sidewalks, so it's pretty common to see joggers or people walking their dogs after dark. Sometimes they'll get creative with the lights. I've seen dog leashes strung with LEDs, people wearing headlamps. This is especially common now, in winter, when the sun sets before 5 p.m. So, I thought nothing of it. A pinprick of light, bobbing up and down the sidewalk, about 30 yards ahead of me. Just another jogger. But then I got closer. And I realized the way the light was bobbing was strange. I couldn't really put my finger on why it was strange, it just was. Something in my brain clicked, it doesn't look like it should. And then, as I passed him, my entire body froze. He had no head. I know. I couldn't be sure, I only saw him for a second. As soon as my brain registered it, he already passed. I glanced at the rearview mirror and saw the bobbing light receding, but it was too dark to see whether he had a head or not. As I drove home, I struggled to find a reasonable explanation for what I'd seen. Maybe he'd been wearing a balaclava. It was pretty cold out. That would render his face nearly invisible in the darkness. Wouldn't I still see his eyes, though? Or something? Or could he have been wearing some sort of costume, some sort of mask? But why? It wasn't anywhere near Halloween. Well, whatever it was, there was no way he was actually headless. It's easy to see things. Not hallucinations, but little glitches in your brain misinterpreting reality. Like when a bit of hair falls in front of your eyes, and you think it's a shadow person for a second. Or when you see a misshapen tree stump by the road, and think it's a deer. I remember the time I convinced myself Santa was real, even though I was too old to believe, because I'd seen a shadow in the neighbor's front yard on Christmas Eve. When it was probably just a bush, or a deer, or even a piece of my hair in my peripheral vision. By the time I was at the front door, I'd completely convinced myself that it wasn't a headless jogger. I scared myself so bad tonight, I told my husband over dinner. On the way home, I saw this jogger, and I thought he didn't have a head. My husband laughed. The headless horseman trying to lose a little weight, huh? I chuckled. Maybe you'll see him at Dawn Yoga next. Doing a downward-facing dog. He took a bite of garlic bread. Or, hey, movie idea. The Headless Horseman for 2024. Ichabod Crane goes on TikTok and finds a headless fitness guru. They could call it the Headless Influencer. Oh my gosh, I laughed, rolling my eyes. But that was before things got worse. On Tuesday night, I took our dog out for a walk after work. And about halfway down the street, I saw it, a light, in the distance, bobbing up and down. I crossed to the other side of the street to get out of his way. Something felt wrong about it, though. That same sense of wrong I couldn't place when I saw the light on the headless jogger. But I continued down the street as he grew closer. And that's when Sadie started to growl. She stared at the light. Ears pinned back, teeth bared, growling. My stomach dropped. It's okay, girl, I said, but the pit in my stomach grew. I tried to walk forward, but Sadie wouldn't budge. So I stood there, phone in hand, pressed against the curb as the light got closer. And closer, and closer. Until he came into view. The jogger's pale arms swung with each step. His feet hit the pavement with a rhythmic thump, thump, thump. The light shone from something strapped to his wrist, erratically bouncing off the asphalt. Thump, thump, thump. Closer. I held my breath, staring at the spot above his shoulders. 15 feet away, now, 10. No. He had no head. It was obvious this time. Absolutely clear. There was nothing above his shoulders but thin air. Yet his body was still pumping away, his feet pounding the asphalt. I stared at him, petrified with fear, not even understanding what I was seeing. Sadie let out a snarl. Then he passed me. And I saw something else. The muscles in his exposed shoulder. In the short, smooth stump of his neck. They moved. As if he was turning to look at me. I yanked on Sadie's leash, and this time she had no problem running. We sprinted back to the house, both of us panting, terrified. As soon as I got inside, I locked every lock we had, even the deadbolt we rarely used. Stephen! I screamed. I told him what happened, tripping over my own words, blabbering, barely coherent. Not knowing what else to do, he called the police. They came over and searched the neighborhood, but they didn't find any headless jogger. Of course they didn't. The three of us packed up and went to my sister's for the night, just an hour away. I couldn't sleep at home. It was on our street. Maybe he even followed me home, knew where we lived. I knew that sounded crazy. But I had seen it, and I would swear on my own life that there was a headless man running around out there. As I stared at the ceiling, trying to fall asleep, a childhood memory popped in my head. A lesser-known Dr. Seuss story that I had loved as a kid. What was I scared of? It was called A Pair of Pale Green Pants, with nobody inside them, follows and torments the main character. It has a happy ending, of course, but the biting unease of seeing something that's so empty, that doesn't have a head or any place to put intelligence or a brain or a soul, yet is moving, acting like something sentient, stuck with me. It felt oddly similar to the feeling I had now, dialed up to 100. We spent 2 nights at my sister's place, but after that, we had to get home. The extra commute time was wearing on both of us, and my sister's 1-year-old was waking us up at night. So we headed back home, and I tried to pretend like I'd never seen the headless jogger. Maybe that was the last time I'd ever see him. It wasn't. Because at 3 a.m. that night, I woke with a start. And when I rolled over, I saw light twinkling in through the blinds. What the hell? Without thinking, I pulled up the blinds. No. My blood ran cold. I stood there, frozen, my feet stuck to the floor. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. I was face to face, or rather face to nothing, with the headless jogger. It was just standing there, 6 feet outside my window. Still as a statue. The blinds clattered shut. When I finally had the courage to peer through them, it was gone. I'm terrified. I don't know what this thing wants, or what it wants to do to me. I don't even know how it's thinking. How it's moving. I went to the police again, but no one will believe me. My husband is suggesting a vacation, just the 2 of us. He thinks I'm going crazy. I'm not. So, please, if you ever see a jogger at night, and you think for a second they don't have a head, don't brush it off as a brain glitch. I hope this reaches the right audience. I need people to understand that my security job is not like any you have heard of before. I am currently in the break room as I write this during my 4th week on the job. I thought I was signing up for a work-from-home role, but it turned out to be work from hell. You're probably wondering why I'm still here giving my predicament, and if you thought it was just for the money, you would be correct. Money was what brought me here, but as I tell you my story, you will come to learn that there are ways to keep someone under your control. I haven't had so much disposable income in my life, but some things money can't buy. I hear the screams of a colleague from the med room as his eyes and face melt from the acidic saliva he came in contact with out on duty. With the dangers of the job and the otherworldly working conditions, I feel like I have some stories that will help you think twice before chasing dollar signs. Just be aware, these may stop at any time due to my untimely demise. My name is Thomas. I have been known as Tommy for as long as I can remember. I had the usual childhood in my hometown. 2 hard-working parents who provided what they could while I took everything for granted. I coasted through school and was lucky to get out without repeating too many classes. I spent some time in the Army once I left high school. Went through basic training, was never top of any class, but I got by. I had some great instructors, who pushed me further than anything I have ever done before. I enjoyed my time there and the people in my company were supportive, but on my 2nd tour things went wild. For the purpose of the story, we will leave it with an honorary discharge with a recommendation to spend some time getting some therapy and a slow reintegration to society. The things I saw over there would change a man. Once I could gather my thoughts into some form of coherence, I decided I was going to live the American dream, and I started my own construction business. I was going to subcontract the work and retire by 45. That failed miserably. I spent the next few years just existing, doing odd security jobs here and there. Working the door at nightclubs on the weekend. Not the existence I had imagined for myself. One busy weekend in the middle of July, I was working the door of a nightclub called Club Rouge. An extremely disturbing place, but that's a story for another day. Tony was on with me that night, a big burly man from Australia. He had shoulders like bowling balls and a nose that had met too many solid objects. He said he played rugby back home, although the scars on his face had more resemblance to knife wounds. We were doing our usual routine as instructed by the owners, keeping the ratio of 2 women to 1 man, but young brunettes were giving priority. Like I said, that place had bad intentions. Did I tell you about the ad on the radio I heard the other night going home? Tony asked. This new place is looking for security guards to work remotely. Pay sounded too good to be true though. It always is. I laughed. That's how they lure you in. You're probably right, but have a listen on your way home. What could be worse than working these doors? Tony grinned. After our shift finished, I headed to my car to start my commute. The roads at this time of night were always quiet. I needed something to keep my mind focused, so I turned on the radio. I usually listen to some podcasts, but Tony had sparked my curiosity. The station came to life as the late-night DJ was closing out the last song. That was our first local submission of the week, a young band called Parmesan Wasps. I'll be back after this short break, and then we are straight into the weekly dilemma. I have been ghosted by the last 5 girls I met at the club. Is it me, or is there something else going on? I don't know about you folks, but I think the texter might need to take a look in the mirror. The ads came on, the usual for this time of night. Keith Stevenson, divorce attorney. Getting itchy feet? Call Keith. Wild West builders. We might be cowboys, but we build it to code. These continued in the same vein until a professional voice announced. Divinity Incorporated, we fuel the future. Remote security jobs available with a controlled audience. Majority of the role consists of WFH. Please call in to attend your induction day at Divinity Inc. Minimum pay of $500 per Earth day worked. I could tell why this caught Tony's attention. The role sounded perfect. I expected to be watching some warehouses on my laptop and making easy money. The term Earth days threw me off a little, but the language the kids use these days was something I couldn't keep up with. I decided as I rounded the corner to my house that I would stop by in the morning and see if they have anything for me. Your destination is on the left, the sat-nav called out. I turned down the lane towards the brilliant white building. The lane was shrouded by trees. Beautiful autumnal leaves scattered the ground. I already had a good feeling about this place. As I approached the car park, it struck me with how many people were working here. There were hundreds of cars, and I had never heard of Divinity Incorporated before. I parked and made my way across to the entrance. The building seemed to glisten in the low rising sun. The steps up the entrance looked like marble. The double doors opened by sensor as I approached and entered. The reception area was a vast room with high ceilings. Glass bowl lights hung down to illuminate the floor. There was a long reception desk to the left of the entrance. Behind was a wood-paneled wall accentuated with pictures of smiling people in suits. A voice called out from the reception desk. Welcome to Divinity Inc. Are you here for the induction day? The voice came from a beautiful brunette barely visible behind the giant desk. I am. I managed to stutter out. She grinned. My name's Annie. It's nice to meet you. She paused, waiting for me to introduce myself. Tommy. I managed. That Irish accent had caught me off guard along with her striking appearance. Man, a few words, Tommy, she laughed. I'll need you to sign this before you head in. Nothing major, just a quick non-disclosure agreement. We deal with private documents, and data protection is a big thing nowadays. I knew I had to pull this back. I had come across as a stuttering buffoon. I put on my best smile and signed the page as I looked her in the eyes. You definitely make it easier to come into work every day, I said as I attempted a laid-back approach of leaning against the desk. She smiled at me with flirtatious eyes until she noticed I had finished signing the page. She grabbed the sheet and filed it away in the drawer with one precise movement. Only then I realized I didn't even read it. This way, please, she said with her back to me, already heading down the hall. She led me through a maze of corridors. Each door showed offices full of people monitoring screens with great intent. I couldn't see what the few closest to the doors were watching, but they were all as focused. We went down a set of stairs and into a large circular room. The wall of the room was littered with outlines of doors, each one with a bronze placard above the outline. I could read the closest two on my left. One said City Suburbs, the other said Waste Drill Site 3. In the middle of the room there was a huge double-sided screen that displayed what looked like a task board like that you would find in any call center. The top task said, look for the Paladin, Town Hall, 5 hours, £15,000 and 40K bonus if found. The bottom of the list had 10 or so duplicates of Shift Security Waste Drill Site 2, $500, 5 hours. Below the screen was what you'd expect to see in a secret armory of a hero in the movies. Racks of rifles, rows of shotguns, handguns of all makes and blades of all lengths. A broad man with a stiff posture stood beside the armor. He had the air of a military general. A stiff iron collar and spit-shined boots. His black hair, flecked with gray, gave him the appearance of a man who has seen many seasons. "Good morning, Mr. Armstrong," Annie called out as we approached. Mr. Armstrong was the main guy here at Divinity Incorporated. He extended his hand and shook mine with one powerful shake that nearly put my shoulder out of my socket. "Gerald," he said as I mentally assessed the damage to my unsuspecting joints. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Tommy," he said, giving me a once-over. I realized I hadn't told him my name yet, but let the thought slide. "It's nice to meet you too," I replied, trying my best to put on a professional front to my potential employer. We had the usual formalities of a job interview. I told him about my previous experience in security and time in the military. He was interested in my combat experience, which, judging by the arsenal behind us, wasn't too much of a surprise. "I'm going to give it to you straight, Tommy. This job isn't your usual security role. These gateways here lead to hell," he said as casually as if he was discussing the weather. He went on to describe how scientists were accelerating particles in the Large Hadron Collider, and a miscalculation led to a gateway being opened to hell. Hadron emitted linear location. He described how they had been traveling here for the best part of 5 years, building research sites across the explored regions of this place where they can extract resources and data. However, all this research needs to be funded, he said, gesturing to the monitors. "We have a very exclusive client base who pay very generously to watch the daily shift. We have body cams, which live stream from each person in hell." "So what's that about the Paladin?" I asked, unsure how I was taking this conversation serious. "Those are tasks you can elect to follow to earn some additional income. A little too risky for a rookie of the company," he said. I later found out the Paladin is a religious fanatic who entered hell to preach the gospel to the non-believers, as he calls them. He jumped with a Bible in one hand and a 12-gauge in the other. He took off his camera as soon as he got through and hasn't returned topside since. The ever-watching eyes are obsessed with his crusade across the land of the damned and pay handsomely for any content including him. "Look, I appreciate you taking the time to see me today, but this all sounds a bit crazy," I said. As I turned to leave, Gerald announced that I wouldn't be going anywhere in a hurry. When I questioned him on this, he informed me that the cute little receptionist is a qualified psychiatric doctor and I had signed a form to admit myself into her care for my own safety. It's always the short ones. I cursed as I realized this man wasn't going to let me go spilling the beans on their operation. "It's best if you just get your induction started," he said as he pressed a button on a keyboard which burst one of the outlines on the wall to life. "I'd grab something from the rack if I were you." As I stepped through, the gateway shapes began to materialize in front of me. I could see 2 men standing over some maps spread out along the wooden desk. The edges were held down by a stapler and a handgun. Bullets were lying loose along the map. One of the men was pointing towards a spot with several red X's in close proximity. I cleared my throat to let them know I was there. "Do you think I'm fucking blind, rookie?" the man on the right yelled. "No, sir," I snapped. His tone brought me straight back to my days in service. This balding, scrawny man who was barely 5'6" on his toes had the air of authority that demanded respect. "Do you see me cutting fucking ribbons or kissing babies on the forehead? I earn a living just as much as the next guy. You can call me Mark." Mark taunted. He gave a slight grin towards the others. Mark was a decent guy once you got to know him, bit rough around the edges. He introduced me to the guys I would be working with. They went by Roscoe, a tall man with a buzz cut that made him look quite formidable, Ian, a young man who looked fresh out of high school, and Evan. He had a warm smile which was a contrast to his features. He had burn scars to the left side of his face down to his hands. His skin looked tender and sore. "Nice to meet you, rookie," Evan said as he shook my hand. "If you make it through the job until the next guy comes along, you can let us know your real name." I laughed, but deep down I knew he wasn't joking. Our tour of the building was same as any workspace walkthrough. They showed me the workspace, kitchen, bathrooms, and where the extra supplies were for the security staff. Once we went outside, that's where everything changed. The scenery was indescribable. "Welcome to El Roscoe," announced. We stepped out through the doors of the watchtower, which overlooked the research labs. The landscape was barren other than our compound. The area we were located in looked like a desert of burnt red sand. The skyline looked to be ablaze, and an ominous wind swept across the vast open space. I noticed an obelisk-like structure 200 feet from the main gate. "What's that?" I asked, pointing in the direction of the misshapen structure. "Transport stones," Ian said. "There's hundreds of them spread across this place. They can open portals for the natives to travel through. Only stay active for a short time, so only a handful of the locals can make a break on us." "Why don't we just destroy it then?" I asked, unnerved. I hoped they didn't hear the tremble in my voice. Mark put his hand on my shoulder a bit too forcefully. "We know exactly where they will come from. Besides, if we close their portals, that will just bring the attention of the generals on us, and you really don't want to have a run-in with one of them. Not too many can say they came across a general and made it back topside," Mark informed me. I spent the first half of my shift with Evan. He introduced me to the workers on site and told me some of the history of this location. Waste Drill Site 3 was founded 6 months ago. They are currently excavating minerals and a form of energy which is 10 times more powerful than the fossil fuels on Earth. He also told me more about the people watching our shifts. "Most important thing is to keep away from any bodily fluid from the locals. It can infect you and turn you into one of them," Evan said. He poured me a cup of coffee from the pot he had freshly brewed. "It's an infection we call the rot. Those that fully transform are called remnants. Tough sons of bitches. If any of us perish out there, you toss one of these on us," he continued. He passed me a small container which he told me would light a body up real good. Apparently the rot could be treated, but the medicine was extremely expensive. Employees of the company got it for a fraction of the price. The infected skin and bones would melt and fuse together in a demonic form. They gained extreme strength and powers still vastly unknown. They seemed to have a high standing in the local population, and there were often task forces sent to take out any that didn't get burned before they turned. As I began to ask Evan more about the remnants, the room erupted in a blaring of sirens. A voice announced over the intercom of a level 2 tree with potential to breach. The team rushed out to the watchtower as I followed behind. I'm not ashamed to admit it here, but the terror was building inside of me. As I looked out at the fragment of reality that had split not 200 feet in front of me, I felt my blood turn cold. The world seemed to quiver as an impossible large ape-like creature with sharp-pointed spikes protruding from obtuse angles marched towards our electrified gate. Demonic-looking humanoids encircled it like an unholy procession of carnage. "Look alive, rookie, we have a date with the devil," Mark roared over the commotion. The enormous monstrosity reached the gate and barreled into it. It crumpled under his weight, but the extreme voltage flowing through its body made it blister and smoke. "Heads down," someone shouted from behind. I couldn't move. These things were about to get in, and I couldn't move any fiber of my body. The giant creature exploded, sending the spikes hurling in all directions. One exploded through the wall to my left and struck a worker in the gut. His entrails leaked out around the edges of the spike, and his skin started to bubble and turn a sickly gray. His screams engulfed my thoughts, and the darkness overtook me. I woke up to Mark standing over me as I lay in a bed in the staff living quarters. He looked battered and bruised, but very much alive. "Take it easy, rookie. You have had a lot to process on your first day." I sat up in the bed and noticed I didn't have any clothes on. "What happened to my clothes?" I asked, very much aware that someone had removed them when I passed out. "You pissed yourself, rookie. We couldn't leave you marinating in it." "Don't worry, it's like a rite of passage for us here at DIV Incorporated. Get dressed and head home. You had an eventful first day," he said with a smile. As I tried to get up from the bed, I noticed a sharp pain piercing my side. As I looked to the source of the pain, I noticed a patch of my skin was gray and withered. Mark noticed the panic on my face. "Not to worry, the rot won't kill you." "Well, not as long as you keep coming back to work," he said with a devilish grin. Something strange happens at the last house on the street. I recently moved to a small town, a peaceful village near the mountains. For security reasons, and I believe you'll understand why later, I prefer not to disclose the location, but it's in Europe. I live in a 2-story wooden townhouse. It has everything I've always wanted: a fireplace, a not-so-uncomfortable cold, and a breathtaking view of nature. Our town is nestled at the foot of a small rocky mountain, and in the valley, we have a dense forest. With this scenery, it's hard to believe that anything could disturb your peace, but apparently, it did. Since I arrived, something has always intrigued me: an abandoned house at the end of the street. It was an imposing building, with heavy windows and an air of desolation that hung over it like a fog. I remember when I passed by there the first time. The air seemed colder than usual, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I know this sounds like something out of a horror movie, but there was definitely something wrong with that house. It had bad vibes, so to speak. I avoided passing by there whenever possible, especially at night. I don't know if it was the scarce lighting or the unconscious fear of the dark, but it seemed even stranger when the sun wasn't in the sky, as if it had awakened, and I felt watched, as if eyes inside were following me as I passed by. It took about 2 weeks for me to decide to do something, and there was a reason for it. Gradually, I began to realize that there was something real there. If I went to bed a little later, around 11 to midnight, as I lay on my pillow and my ears gradually adjusted to the stillness and silence, I could hear in the distance a sound, something like music perhaps, but very muffled, in the distance. It didn't take long for me to decide to investigate where the noise was coming from. One weekend, from Friday to Saturday, I decided to stay awake, watching through the curtains of my room, trying to see any movement. Nothing. The streets were deserted. But I saw a slight movement in that house at the end of the street. Gradually, the noise became clearer, and it was obvious where it was coming from. I also began to notice that the lights inside would come on around that time, flickering and dim, like candles. As the weeks went by, my curiosity only grew. I knew I should avoid that house, that it was better to keep my distance and mind my own business, but something inside me was deeply intrigued. Who could be inside? What were they doing there? I tried, as I got to know the neighbors, to talk to them about it, but any mention was fruitless, and they quickly changed the subject to how the weather was or something similar. They seemed to be hiding something indeed, and never mentioned it directly until, in a conversation with Mrs. Gertrude, my neighbor and one of the oldest residents of the place, she turned to me, grabbed my wrist tightly, a force that I didn't think an 80-year-old lady could have, and said, "You shouldn't get involved with that house, young man. No one should. Stop asking around, they're starting to suspect your interest." After that, she let go of me, returning to normal and bidding farewell. And I know it's foolish of me, reckless after that, but I decided I needed to find out more. I carefully planned my foray. I waited until today, a particularly dark night, when the moon is hidden by its own shadow, providing me with the perfect cover to move unnoticed. With my heart pounding in my chest, I quietly descended the stairs and walked out the front door. The cold night air enveloped my body, but it wasn't just the cold that made me tremble. A mixture of fear and excitement pulsed through my veins as I approached the eerie house. Every step I took seemed to echo in the quiet of the night. The shadows of the few yellow streetlights danced around me, creating sinister illusions that made me question my own sanity. I considered turning back home about 3 or 4 times while on the way, but I couldn't go back. I reached the house and hesitated for a moment. What would I find inside? What was causing those strange noises and lights? I decided to peek through the dusty window at the back, pressing my face against the cold glass. My breathing was quick and shallow, and I struggled to keep my nerves under control. Inside the house, shadows danced in the dim light of the candles, creating a surreal and disturbing atmosphere. A soft, but distorted, music floated through the air, filling me with a sense of discomfort. I saw some people moving slowly inside, the candlelight not enough to illuminate them clearly. Not that proper lighting would help identify anything. I noticed that their faces looked strange and, when my eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, I realized they were wearing masks. Their formal attire, with suits and dresses, matched the golden adornments covering their faces. As I watched, I felt a thread of fear run down my spine. Those people seemed to move slowly and erratically. The sound of the music was hypnotic, but also disturbing, as if it were coming from a broken music box. There was a continuous noise, like from a phonograph, but I didn't see the machine anywhere. The music now reached a climax with its violins and tambourines, now in sync with my pounding heart, hammering in my chest as I tried to process what I was seeing. Who were those people? They could be anyone, any neighbor, maybe someone I had mentioned the house to before. That thought filled me with agony. My instinct told me to flee as fast as possible, but my curiosity overcame fear. I needed to know more. Careful not to make any noise, I continued to observe, hoping for any clue that could help me understand what was happening in that eerie house. It was then that I noticed something even more disturbing, which made me choke as I moved away from the glass, my hands trembling. In the center of the room, I saw a tall, slender figure, dressed in a dark cloak that almost blended with the shadows around it. His movements were fluid and calculated, as if conducting a macabre dance, a kind of maestro of the dancers. He wore a golden mask, displaying a grimace. Terror surged within me as I realized that figure was watching me. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, fixed on me as if he could see me through the shadows, the glass, and flesh, staring into my soul. It was as if my presence there had not only been discovered but expected. A chill ran down my spine, and I knew it was time to get out of there. With quick and silent steps, I moved away from the house and ran back to my townhouse, my heart still pounding uncontrollably. I arrived home breathless, locking the door behind me and collapsing on the sofa, trying to process what had just happened. As I tried to calm my rapid breathing, my mind spun with the disturbing images and sounds I had witnessed in that sinister house. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized that those events were beyond my understanding. It wasn't just a strange party or an unusual social gathering. There was something deeply sinister happening in that house, something that probably had been going on long before I arrived here. As I tried to regain my composure, a sense of paranoia began to creep over me. Did everyone know I was watching them? And most importantly, were they following me? I trembled at this last thought, checking if all the doors and windows were securely closed at least 3 times. I tried to sleep, going to bed, but my mind wouldn't calm down. About 15 minutes ago, however, I heard a crack at my window. I gave a small startle in bed, but suspected it was the glass expanding with the night's temperature. However, the crack repeated. This time I saw it, a small object, which I suppose was a stone, hitting the surface. With my heart beating harder than ever, I got out of bed and approached the window, feeling overwhelmed by primal instincts. Each step felt heavy and impossible to walk. My hands trembled as I carefully pulled the curtains aside, revealing the darkness outside. And my mind went wild. Standing there, looking at the window, was the maestro. His eyes shining from beneath the mask, which now displayed a disturbing smile. I know he saw me because after I looked at him, he didn't throw any more stones, just stood there. I'm terrified now as I type. I keep checking the doors and windows constantly, but he's still there, motionless. I don't know what the hell this is, if it's a bizarre custom, or ritual, or whatever, but I just want it to stop. And as I finish writing here, I realize that the maestro is now, slightly, albeit only a step, closer to my door. I've never wanted the sun to rise so much, and I hope I remain intact when it does.